What happened? Why aren't we enjoying our freedoms?
I mean, some people are, but some people find it paralyzing. You can do anything, and so you are kind of terrified by the sheer volume of options, and you shrink and you curl in on yourself and you do nothing. Even when we find rules or structures to be constraining, maybe even we chafe against their boundaries, there's also safety. You know, a cage is something that keeps you in, but it also keeps other people from getting at you. It keeps you safe. And to be out and moving freely through the world means that you may misstep, and you may have to reckon with having made that misstep.
Kat Rosenfield, welcome to the Hope Axis. This is a podcast where we talk about some of the most challenging topics of 2025 and beyond. But we're trying to look at what is it that keeps us going? What is it that makes us hopeful? You know, I'm a very hardworking person. I have extremely prolific, very talented, very successful people on this podcast. And clearly through your work, you guys act as a type of hope hub for people. And I find that especially interesting in your case, because through your Substack Feminine Chaos and through your work at the Free Press, you know, you write about very spicy topics when it comes to millennial women. You write about, and not just millennial women, female culture as it is in America. You know, you write about rich husbands and boob jobs and porn and wellness, cheating. Like we're you know, delighted in this assortment of topics. And you always leave us with a sense of, you know, a sense of a belief in the agency of women. That this is not something where determinism puts us in this water slide and then sends us goodbye, and there's nothing we can do. As I'm reading you, you see the world in a very kind of existentialist way, where we are put into these situations and we are given different tools and limitations. And then within that, we do have some freedom. And we don't have to necessarily do dumb shit all the time. But it's not mandatory. You know, there are ways to avoid that. So I'm so curious how you know, came to that point in believing in us so much. I find that very, I find it actually a much more optimistic kind of instruction or form of instruction for younger women than just, you know, bemoaning the loss of, I don't know, traditional chicken keeping and warfare. That's very important as well, but, you know, maybe for like daily life.
So chicken keeping, warfare, and a secret third thing.
Yeah, the secret, more complex third thing. So let's talk about that, Kat. What are you working on right now? What is one area of millennial womanhood that keeps you up at night or wakes you up in the morning?
So I've actually gotten very interested in the way that millennial women, and I think women in general, are incentivized to see themselves as lacking in agency. And this is something that I feel like I'm always circling in my journalism, in my fiction, in my reporting, in my cultural analysis. And it's also something that I feel like I've periodically bumped up against in my own life. I understand that it's very seductive. There is something seductive about the idea of saying, I didn't do whatever it was, the, you know, bad thing that happened to me. I had no choice. And I think that I don't know if it's a new thing that is sort of coming in the wake of the sexual revolution and in the wake of women's liberation and feminism, to the point where, you know, at this point there's very little that you could point to facially, very few areas in which women are no longer on or are not on equal footing with men, right? Like, is there any right that they have that we don't? Is there anything that they can do that we can't, you know, or that we're not allowed to, rather? We've been sort of loosed, you know, we're unrestrained, we're liberated. And yet, once you are given that ability to self-determine, it ends up coming with a certain amount of responsibility. It means that sometimes you're going to make choices and they don't work out and you have regrets or you feel shame, which is the worst thing. And I have been interested to see, especially in the era where everybody is sort of making their personality or their life into a brand, where that we are encouraged to self-narrativize, how powerful the incentive is often to seek a narrative about yourself as a victim. You're the main character, the protagonist of the story, but you're not triumphant. You're a person things happen to instead of a person who is doing things.
I know this is the $1 billion question or $1 trillion question or $27 trillion inherited from the boomers when they die question. But
they're never going to die.
They're never going to die. I was explaining to somebody a couple of days ago that we are all like King Charles, that we are children until we're 78, and then we inherit the kingdom if we don't die fast. It's a very interesting, I think longevity has very interesting, it presents a kind of reconfiguration for the nuclear family that we are just adjusting to. Like there's inheritance, like that whole idea is kind of gone. But I'm so curious how is it possible? I moved to America from a place that actually has a lot of sexist laws and norms, and they are extremely, entrenched in how our society functions. So much so that sometimes the law changes, but people don't. And they change it back. It's kind of a weird situation. And I'm so curious how, I'm in America and I do see so much freedom in so many areas. How did this victimhood narrative take hold of people? Is it just because we are competing with everybody else for attention in the social media era, and bad news kind of spreads faster? So if I claim that, I'm the victim, more people will pay attention to me, like the French Lutenist woman. What happened? Why aren't we enjoying our freedoms?
That's an interesting question. I mean, some people are, but some people find it paralyzing. And I don't know if, I think I'm sure it's a number of different things. I'm sure part of it is like the choice paralysis, where you can do anything. And so you are kind of terrified by the sheer volume of options, and you shrink and you curl in on yourself and you do nothing. The other thing is, so we've, it's true, eliminated certain barriers and certain, especially kind of social barriers that might have stood, particularly in millennial women's way. I mean, we are a very individualistic society in the United States. We're really predicated on the individual, which is not a bad thing, but it means that you can often feel like you're kind of on your own. And women, I think, more so than men, were not always expected to make their own way. There was a time when there was an expectation that you would be cared for or kept, and that was something you should seek out. You weren't going to be allowed to make your own way, so you needed to find somebody who would kind of care for you, or somebody who would die and leave you the money that you could use to care for yourself. Once that is gone as a paradigm, it does kind of eliminate a certain amount of structure, and there's comfort in structure. And I write about this a lot. One of my next novel is called How to Survive in the Woods, is about how even when we find rules or structures to be constraining, maybe even we chafe against their boundaries, that there's also safety. A cage is something that keeps you in, but it also keeps other people from getting at you. It keeps you safe. There's safety rather in being confined in that way. And to be out and moving freely through the world means that you may misstep, and you may have to reckon with having made that misstep. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense, and it also makes me wonder. I mean, you're an acclaimed novelist. You have written multiple books, numerous books. As you kind of observe female culture changing, do you find yourself writing different types of characters? Like, do the women in your books evolve as your kind of perception evolves of like how we are?
That is so interesting. I'd never ever thought about this. So I think that oftentimes characters will be asking they'll embody questions that I'm interested in, not so much that they represent like some kind of ever-shifting archetype of the millennial woman. In many cases, my characters aren't millennials, or they're not specifically millennials, although they probably feel like it to somebody reading. But I like to use the structure of story and the safety of a fictional world to kind of poke at things. And so I'm trying to think about how to talk about this without like spoiling anything. But
like, is there a character that you're writing about now that would not have made sense to anybody, say 10, 12 years ago, or vice versa? Like, do you have?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, the book that I have coming out next March, you've the central question is, or one of the central questions is, what does it mean to be a survivor? And sometimes to survive is to thrive, but sometimes, and especially now, to survive is to make whatever happens to you central to your life. Do you identify as a survivor? Like, is that in your bio on your social media? Or is that what you're leading with? And I do have a character who has, all my characters are in different ways survivors. It's sort of the way we explore the different types, that there are different ways to do this. One of them is one of these women who went through something traumatic and who has chosen to make it central to her identity in the aftermath. And, she's the one who has survivor in her bio. She's the one who uses this trauma in her past to create a sense of intrigue around who she is in the present. And I don't think, even though, the person with a mysterious trauma in their past is in some senses an archetype that goes way back. You have your femme fatales, you have your kind of wounded birds. The idea of a woman taking that and intentionally using it to market and to create content, I think is something that would not have been recognizable. Certainly, 20 years ago, no. Before social media, absolutely not. And even then, I think it's something that's come to the forefront much more in the past 10 years.
We hear about these, holy individuals from the Middle Ages. Ira Dumitrescu was on this podcast, who is a wonderful medievalist and kind of understands the remnants or the residues of medieval archetypes in contemporary society, like the medieval, origins of self-care books and self-care meditations, and but also these chosen people who are so often self-chosen, and they have always been. And it's so interesting to me that with the loss of the religious framing around some of these types of, suffering, you are looking for the personal story. You are looking for the undeniable, when the only thing that is to be respected in any way in society is if you tell your own story and you say, well, this is what happened to me. Here are my scars. Nobody can really challenge that. But I don't know how. I have had my own experiences with this thing, but making it central to one's character or one's identity, I find that to be extremely limiting. So I'm so interested in how people find freedom in it, or even, some opportunity for monetization. Do you think that's a typical millennial thing? Or is this something that Gen X somehow bestowed upon us and we just gracefully we forgave them and forgot about it?
I think it's an attention economy thing. And, I think a lot about the idea of what it means to seek attention and what gets a person attention. And I do think that this is a path more open to women, and especially to young women, than to men. A wounded woman, especially if she's young, is intriguing. And there's certainly an element of sex appeal there. A man who was like, I'm traumatized, I don't think people find that sexy. Like, if he takes his trauma and he becomes John Wick, and he goes on like a killing spree, and he kind of he asserts it in a very masculine way,
A
maybe.
brooding teenager with a too strict father.
Right, right. But we don't want men to cry about their trauma or about how like their dads were mean to them. That's not sexy, at least. Or I mean, not to me personally. If it's your thing, like, no shade. But women do find this niche to kind of market themselves as damaged in a way that says, like, take care of me. That is sort of the through line in it.
Maybe men, or at least men in our generation, want to prove that they're feminists, that they're allies, and that they can be better to you than whatever happened to you in your past. So it's almost like a call to action, like, come and prove it to me that they are nice men, and then somebody hopefully signs up on that mailing list.
Yeah, and I think the interesting thing about this is that women who make this type of content, like this character, who defines herself as a survivor and in doing so centers trauma in her life in a way that she can never let go of it. She can never stop talking about it. That presents the appearance of strength, but it does become inherently self-limiting because you're never allowed to move past it. Instead, you have this hole, you have this damage, and you start building something around it, and suddenly your life takes the shape of this bad thing that happened to you, and it can never be different beyond that unless you're willing to break the thing at the center. But there's a very powerful incentive not to do that.
This does seem like a change to me, actually. I think this is, and I hope it's not very Lindy and it's going to go away, because, I mean, we spent a very long period in our history in the West, in our culture in the West, where damaged women were not at all seen as desirable. And women were kind of incentivized. It was horrible for women who were cursed in some ways, because very often outside religion, there was no refuge for them unless they, when they had like an exceptionally good family and caring family. But it's also kind of made women, I mean, all of Jane Austen is about women trying to avoid getting off the marriage market and getting themselves into situations where that would be jeopardized. And the characters who don't fight that instinct, I mean, you need to have a really good reason. Either you need to be very silly in these books, or you need to be extremely romantic and sentimental to kind of override the rationality. And so I do think that because it's relatively new and relatively, not super well established, maybe it will just pass. But in your pieces, you also write about things that don't change. And most recently, something that I found so interesting is the endurance of the rich husband. What's the deal with that? And why do we still love rich husbands? I think there is something formidable to be unearthed about how status works in sex and marriage in the 21st century. I think millennial women are only kind of coming to terms with these things as we are becoming middle-aged. Kind of, I have to talk about the middle ages in a different context. And more and more novels are talking about this. More and more people are trying to face the demon. So what's going on with status, and why are we into rich husbands still?
I don't think that we would necessarily admit that out loud. It's funny.
In Manhattan, you can say it here, but in Brooklyn, it would be a problem.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking about that piece was pegged to this movie, The Materialists, which I found interesting for a number of reasons.
One of them, for those of you listening and watching, it's a movie, right, with Pedro Pascal and Dakota Johnson, right?
Yeah, and Chris Evans. Yes, playing Chris Evans plays a kind of a broke failure to launch case. He's a guy in his like mid to late 30s who is still trying to be an actor, and it's not going very well. And I mean, I've always thought it was interesting. It's obviously a key thing in these movies. Like you can get away with that, with being the sort of eternal child if you look like Chris Evans. It's really kind of not going to work
I
out
was going to
otherwise.
say, like, of course he can be a film to launch. He's Chris Evans. Like, that's you've already won, right?
Yes. But something about that, I mean, that movie, it is not actually, it looks like it might be a rom-com, but it's actually not funny. It's quite serious. It looks quite seriously at things. Did you think it was funny?
I have not seen it. There was an AM.
Oh, okay. I was like, you were making this
There was
face,
an
and I was like,
AM
oh no.
theory, but I thought it was a comedy, and I really wanted to go and see it a couple of times, and then just like the time didn't work. But I'm happy I didn't, because I thought it was a comedy, and I wanted to go and relax. But now it's going to make me think, right?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I was very
But in
intrigued.
a
There are
good way.
moments.
I mean, based on your article, it's something that people should watch and discuss.
I thought it was good. I enjoyed it. I went in completely cold, but I was aware I was there in the theater, and all around me were groups of young women who had clearly gone to see it in groups, thinking that they were going to like see something fun and they were going to see some eye candy, and it ended up being a pretty serious meditation on what does it mean to commit to somebody? Why do we get married? And why do we do that, especially in a world where women are not just able to take care of themselves, but often expected to take care of themselves. And I was just thinking about something and it kind of flew out of my head, but I'm going to get back to it. It was about structure. Yeah, it was about structure. There was this push. Women don't need a man to take care of them. Women can make their own money. They can own their own property. They can do their own thing. They don't need a male provider. But this movie kind of examines what happens after the liberation. Is there something in us that still fundamentally desires, not necessarily to be taken care of, but the status that comes from being with somebody who could take care of us if we asked, or who would offer, and you'd say, oh, no. And this is one of these things.
Say it's nice being asked.
Yes, yeah. And I mean, the old kind of, I would say the most romantic paradigm, the romantic story, when a woman is faced with the choice between the broke artist with whom she has a passionate and torrid romance, really in love, great sexual chemistry and whatnot, or a very wealthy, very handsome, very desirable man who wants to marry her, who wants to take care of her, who will and is a nice guy, there's nothing wrong with him. He's not like a bastard. But the romantic thing, you'd say, of course you choose the artist. Of course you choose you choose love. This movie says, do you? What happens after that? Because the thing about marriage plots, and this is what's so Austenian about it, is that they get together, they get married, and then they live happily ever after, probably. But then the story ends there, but life doesn't. And this movie,
it's fine. The Disney movies ending with the kiss traditionally, and then
exactly the closing clinch.
Yeah,
and this movie asks this question, which is, say they choose each other, say they choose love. Well, what happens after that? It's not as though, the act of choosing love makes all of the resentments that you might build up over, feeling like you have to do everything if you're the woman, or the way that it feels to be a man and to feel like you can't provide. Those things are, I don't want to say hardwired. I don't want to get too Evo psych here, but I do think that, or at least this movie suggests, that maybe there is something about those ancient roles that did feed us in a certain way, and we got rid of them, and we didn't replace them with anything, and now people are all kind of casting about, scrambling around, trying to reintroduce something, some kind of structure to hold on to and to build their lives around.
Not to mention that mating is about choice, right? And you can choose things based on some criteria. And not every person is at liberty to construct their entire life from scratch. First principles, every social contract they have, every piece of selection criteria. It's really hard work. Like there's a reason why we, have societies that at least give some shape to it. But I'm so interested in the story because this is what Onyegin is about. Pushkin Onyegin, right? Like Tatyana doesn't actually marry Onyegin. Tatyana marries a soldier, the stable choice. And later on, she finds out that that was actually a very good idea.
Yeah. Yeah. The characters in The Materialists, they exist in a world where they kind of have the worst of everything because they are, on the one hand, they've been told all their lives that they need to value love, they need to find somebody who loves them, and this is the explicit promise of this matchmaking agency that the main character works for. You become her client. She says, "I promise you are going to marry the love of your life," and yet they're already in this gamified system where there's a list of criteria. There's boxes that each suitor already has to check. He has to make a certain amount of money. He has to be above a certain height. He has to, I don't know, like have a prestigious job, or he's got to be handsome, or, whatever it is. And for the men, the same thing. And so we do live in this moment where we are selecting people in this very kind of checkbox way where, we're not at the outset looking for chemistry. We're looking for, do you meet my criteria? And then we're hoping chemistry will spring up organically with somebody who already checks all the boxes. And so, it kind of eliminates the possibility of an inconvenient passion. And yet I think people are still yearning for the inconvenient passion.
Are they? I always wonder about this. Are they? I find even just compared with like my student years 20 years ago, like where are the inconvenient affairs? Nobody's having even affairs anymore. Cartoons Hate Her just showed this piece about the Coldplay debacle, the Jumbotron cheaters, or we don't know, right? And we can't believe TMZ, that the smartphone killed the affair, which doesn't fully correspond with my experiences, but it seems that we are a little bit less adventurous, right? We are more like Instacart shopping when it comes to this stuff, and I often wonder whether actually there is this flip that's not just the kind of Gini coefficient of all women trying to go for the alpha dogs, on apps where they can choose. But that, when it comes to changing the criteria, women have a little bit more flexibility when it comes to makeup and gym and plastic surgery, et cetera. Whereas for men, some of the things that we decide by are impossible or very, very hard to change. Like you can't change your height. There are some other measurements that you probably can't change. If you go bald, you have to be a very rich guy to change that with a very tolerant social circle. For women, it's much easier to tweak yourself, at least online, into somebody that most people would find desirable. And because we already start with a bigger spread, like the Pareto for who women find desirable and who men find desirable are completely the opposite. I find that it's also changing the power dynamics a little bit. There are apps now for only tall guys. I don't know how they, what do you need a slip of paper from your doctor to prove your height? I don't know. But it's just a kind of interesting era of confusion that I think we're living in. And you are writing about the boob job is the boob job passé? We don't know. I want to hear about this. But we are rethinking these things, right? Like we want the status, but how to signal status, we're not currently sure about. Do you think this is also just because millennial women are getting older?
Yes. So, it's weird. This is like such a selection bias thing. I don't know how true this is across the board, but I was talking with my husband the other day about how many of my friends who are my age never ended up getting married, or even have long-term partners. And I don't know if this is just, if it's something in my particular cohort. I am from a northeastern state. I went to college. I moved to New York City afterward. I worked in media. And so all of my friends are from, those worlds, basically. They're, I guess you would call us like coastal elites or whatever. And I don't know if this is true across the board for women of different like backgrounds or socioeconomic classes or whatever. But it seems to me like there's this very peculiar dearth of partnering happening in my cohort.
I mean, this is what Ellis Evans writes about, right? That it's not a fertility crisis, it's a mating crisis. Like, people are not coupling up as they used to, and that I think more people will regret that part than the not having kids part. That's kind of my bet. We will see. It's so interesting. So, because I actually had one of my questions for you was that what are the things now that we're becoming middle aged a little bit, entering our 40s as a generation, the millennials. Like, what were the things that surprised you the most about us? And it sounds to me that this is one of those things, right? The lack of, like, when you have so much choice and so much freedom and so much encouragement from society to actually not just find your partner, but turn that partnership into something that works for you. Like, nobody's going to judge you, right? Like, just do whatever you want and find your niche on the internet. It's not happening. Like, what might be some other things that you, as a keen observer, as a basically an internet anthropologist of our generation, that really, really shocks you and you're still looking for answers for?
Oh God, it is. I do think a lot about this. Did the pressure to self-actualize, and to have it all and to not settle for anything less than you deserved, give women, and not only women, but I think maybe women more, a disproportionate or inaccurate sense of what they could actually expect out of life. I do think that there's a certain amount of, I don't know, I'm trying in real time to think my way through this. And how does it connect to the pressure to self-mythologize, to self-narrativize, to imagine yourself then as like deserving of something more. And of course, we do also live in an era where it's like you're always aware of the other options out there, that you really do have to actively choose, not just once, but on an ongoing basis, to whatever it is you're in your life, whatever person you've chosen, whatever career you've chosen, wherever you live, all these things, you're always being bombarded with the awareness that you could be doing something else, which I feel like maybe used to be more of a midlife crisis thing. You would get into your 40s and you would start to sense mortality, and you would start to sense like, okay, my whole life is no longer ahead of me. There are doors that are closed to me. There are choices that I made in the past that, that have caused certain paths to be cut off. And that was like, it would be kind of devastating because you would realize it all at once. I don't know if the kind of plethora of other narratives and the visibility of other people's lives, many of which are being performed in a way that's not necessarily like, doesn't really comport with reality, but it looks really good on a phone screen. If that has made discontentment more rampant, like, and more continuously so for our generation than in previous. Do you think that makes sense?
I think about that a lot myself, obviously, and I'm so curious what your strategies are in navigating it. I mean, I think we both spend our professional lives on the internet, where you're constantly in this very mimetic space. There's competition, there are tribes, there's always something that seems to be better than something that you're doing at the time. You start writing an article and now you're writing 6 articles, and you're starting to read a book, and then there are other books. So and there's always somebody to signal to you that you should be working on something else. There's never, we don't have the, Gandalf showing up on his white horse telling us that this is the right thing and the right choice, and the world will stop whilst we're working on this book or whilst we're building this company. I find like one thing that surprises me about millennials is how extreme the measures that some people are taking to remove themselves from these battlefields, internalized battlefields are. It's almost like very few people that I know, at least in America, in Europe, that exists. It's still, you still find that. Very few people do I know who live in the city, who are embedded in the everyday culture of online, offline, and still manage to carve out this kind of C.S. Lewis internal garden without physically removing that from it. Most of the people I know who want to free themselves from this competition move out of the big cities, like physically put themselves into, closer to nature or closer to their parents, or there's always something drastic. In other cases, there are very drastic lifestyle changes, people joining extreme wellness trends, or, they are entering psychedelic realms or meditative realms where, the proportions completely change. And I'm always curious about the kind of Aristotelian virtues here, the midway, where you can find the moment of calm without forcefully removing yourself from it, because that's almost like a cope in my business. I'm not saying you need to go on pilgrimages like that temporarily, of course, but I feel like there is something about the commuter that I greatly respect. I live in this little apartment on the Upper West Side, and I feel like I'm in a village because all I have is trees and pillows. But then I can go downstairs and re-enter the madness of New York City. And I'm not saying this is ideal. Obviously, we are all on journeys trying to figure out how to do this. But I think my European heart is always pulling me to the midway, like how to be. But there's no narrative. Like if I want to read about lifestyles like these, I have to, go to like mid-century Parisian literature, like how these artists lived. There's almost no contemporary narrative. I know some people who do this, but they don't talk about it. No, nobody says like, I'm in the middle and I love it because I actually get the best of both worlds. And this is work, do what I do. I would love to hear more about that, actually.
Yeah, I moved out of the city for my husband's job. I was a freelance writer at that point. I got laid off from my office job in 2008 when the economy imploded, and I just never went back to an office after that. I've been self-employed for 17 years. Feels like a long time. And so something that I kind of stumbled upon in doing that, because it's not like I would have ever chosen to move to Connecticut. I had no great desire or like long time dream.
Connecticut is not really the middle of nowhere. So you didn't move into like rural Arizona into a house you built with your hands, right? So
no. Of course,
the Midway.
I grew up in the middle of nowhere in upstate New York, in the rural country. And I did for a while kind of yearn to move back to my hometown. But it's not a place where there's really much in the way of opportunity. And, once I was established as a freelance writer, I could have done that, but I have a spouse who needs to also work. And so something that I stumbled upon kind of early on that I think has actually served me very well was that I was willing to kind of go wherever. And I decided I would just grow where I was planted. And if that was going to be random Connecticut, okay, here we are. And when we got here, we rented an apartment, and something I did after we'd been there, I think maybe 3 years, I planted a garden, at our apartment, and it ended up being both a very useful and a very painful lesson in what it means to just to say, okay, here I am. I'm not going to hold back from doing things that bring me joy or to feeling invested in where I am. So I planted this garden. I made it beautiful. I had it for 6 years. And then we moved to a house. We managed to buy a house right at the start of the pandemic. And it was just about a mile away from our previous place. And so I transplanted a decent number of my plants, not all of them survived, but I did try. I dug up what I could. I brought it with me, but the bulk was still there. And I thought, this will be nice for the next people who move in to this apartment. There'll be a nice garden outside for them to enjoy. And about a year after we had moved in, this is not a happy story, I was driving down my old street and I thought, I'm just going to take a peek over the fence to see how my garden is doing. And it was gone. They had paved it. I had a panic attack for the first and only time in my life. And I drove home and I cried. But
it's horrible. It's like the paradise, right?
Yes.
I do that.
I was living in a Joni Mitchell song for that moment. But I don't know. I felt like it's not like I had regrets, that garden brought me a lot of joy. And I do think that, there's this idea that you have to kind of wait for everything to be perfect before your life can start. You have to get everything in place and then you can do what you really want to do. I have to line up all of these ducks. I have to have my career just so, and then I'll have children. I have to move into the house that I'm going to live in for the rest of my life, and then I'll plant a garden. And I think that line of thinking, just to kind of come full circle to what we were talking about before, that is maybe something that specifically plagues millennials and millennial women. This idea that, everything has to be exactly right, and then you can start your life. But if you do that, you will never start your life, and you'll be living this, kind of yearning existence where you're waiting and waiting and waiting and not really, I don't want to say self-actualizing because I don't really believe in that, but you are depriving yourself of richness.
And there's bitterness down the line, right? I think millennials don't yet know that on the far side of the 40s comes the bitterness, because it starts with you're just a little bit depressed about things not working out your way. And then people can kind of ossify into some very negative characteristics. Mm-hmm. And don't know yet that there is almost a moral duty to making oneself happy, right? Because otherwise you might turn into a really bad person. Bad in the sense that you will be mean to other people and you will appreciate them less. And, you will maybe end up robbing other people of their hope. Why do millennials do this? I'm so interested in how I actually tried to explain this to some very normie European friends once. The people that I know who have the best lives moved a lot. They didn't set, we tell ourselves to settle. We want ourselves to make quantitative compromises in order to feel like an adult, as opposed to qualitative ones. And we misunderstand what are things that we can sacrifice on, what are things that we will be able to live with, right? Mm-hmm. Marrying the wrong person, staying in the wrong house, staying in the wrong job, the wrong city. And I feel like maybe boomers were a little bit better at uprooting things, and maybe we are just traumatized by our parents because there was so much divorce and moving around. But I think millennials are definitely overcompensating. And so I try to explain to people this very counterintuitive thing, which I don't know what to do with. I mean, having immigrated multiple times and having moved way more than I thought I would. But this feeling of, if I update my priors based on new information that I didn't know before, and I find out that what I wanted, where I wanted to live, who I wanted to live with, doesn't work, I don't have to stay in that. Like, this doesn't mean to blow up other people's lives or hurting other people, but like, if there's a way, or it's like a mutual incompatibility between like myself and London, and we just hate each other, it's okay to move from there. Even if everybody around you is brainwashed to liking it, it's completely fine. And it's going to be very difficult. And you will live out of a suitcase for a year and whatever, you have to restart. But now that I've done it a few times, I'm observing people around myself. And I think you are one of the people who just like went until you actually found your equilibrium in some sense, right? Like, you're not going to stay renting in that apartment because you've created a nice garden, but you would be surprised how many people would have just stayed there.
It's interesting. I mean, of course,
I'm not trying to like blow up your life, but like we make choices with far less information than how much we will be gaining after that. And I think when you don't have to stay in something, you don't have to stay there in some sense, right? This is why, I don't know, marriage and children and commitment, that's a different question, because what you're saying is that even if there will be times when I think that this is not working, I'm going to stay.
Right. I was going to say, it's interesting to hear you talk about this and to consider it in the context of this narrative that has emerged and has been like huge in the culture for the past year or so. And it is definitely pegged to millennials entering midlife, of the woman with often, definitely with a husband, often with children, who realizes that she doesn't really want what she thought she wanted, and she's going to blow up her life, and she's going to, divorce her husband and move out and start over and, I don't know, get a 22-year-old boyfriend, and it's going to be so great. And there's so much going on, like all these threads I want to pull together. I think that part of this is, again, that idea of like, if you don't feel like you're self-actualizing, then, the most important thing is that you do feel like you are, even if that means that you have to like break something precious that you've spent years and years and years building. But the other thing is, I do think that one of the big differences for our generation as versus previous generations is we no longer have like a clear pathway to getting old, and there's a real resistance to it. Nobody knows how to be old. And instead of like being able to kind of pass into, I don't know, like being a matriarch or being just like a middle-aged frump or being a crone, I always say that I want to skip over middle age and go straight to my Baba Yaga era. Like, but there's not
Yoko Ono with the big black sunglasses and a cool.
Yes. Yeah. Once I go gray, I'm going full on like, town witch. That's going to be it.
I was just talking with Natasha Zhukovsky, the novelist who was also on this podcast a couple of months ago. And we're both like, we want to be like super chic 40-year-olds. Like, we want to buy 40-year-old clothes and like really own it and do the Catherine Deneuve thing and just really kind of grow into it. Because that's kind of missing. And there are things that I could never wear before because I wasn't old enough. And now I'm like, give it to me,
I mean, while I'm sitting here, I'm like, I'm 43. Like, do I still wear a bikini? Is that a thing? But there's this expectation that you're supposed to. Like, I mean, we're I think the first generation that has been encouraged that we kind of have to just be sexy until we die. And that's a lot of pressure.
I mean, please be if you want to, but I want to remove the kind of obligation. And that's actually a very interesting thing. And I think that's also a kind of hormonal change. Like I definitely felt a hormonal shift in like my worldview when I turned 30, and then also when I turned 40. And like the amount of energy I have to pleasing men is like, I don't know, has been cut by like 75%. Like I used to feel somehow that this was my job, and I'm like, no, I actually have a job. And that's my job. And everything else is kind of optional. But it's like it just went away, and it occurs to me at much like rarer intervals. And I don't know. I think that's good, right?
Yeah. I'm actually curious about something. I don't want to turn it around on you because I'm on your
Like, yeah, you're a
podcast.
journalist.
But
It's like interviewing a journalist always. And let me turn it around.
yeah, but you're not married, right?
No, I'm not.
Have you ever been?
No, I almost got married once, and then I had this vision. I was standing in my apartment in Budapest, and I was dating this very young, well-known musician. I was the rock star girlfriend, which I loved. And I don't know, he was criticizing something about me, and all of a sudden I visualized, I saw the ideal wife for this man. Like I saw like a ghost, like a premonition. And I was like, why are we having this conversation? Like, clearly there is this woman who would be your perfect wife. She's like me, but she shuts up, you know, she's like me, but she's younger. She's like me, but she has a job because of which she can't leave. And my ex actually ended up marrying this woman. Looks like me, but smaller, quiet, and also like a Hungarian literature teacher in Hungary. So it's perfect.
Oh, wow.
Emigrate with that job. And I just like, I saw that. And since then I have this kind of unshakable feeling that people almost project from themselves their ideal partner, but often they don't know. And then sometimes, you know, I meet somebody and their partner and it's like perfect. But I've had this feeling, you know, from hopeful people like, oh, I'm sure we will end up getting married. And you're thinking, you're already in your crone stage and you're thinking to yourself like, oh, honey, no. This is not going to work out. So I had that feeling, and that was so interesting to me. Yeah, sorry. Am I answering your question?
Yeah, what I was curious, you know, I mean, so you almost got married but didn't, and because you saw the specter of the woman who'd be more suited to this guy. I mean, do you still now like? Is that something you still think about wanting to do? Do you feel like a yearning for companionship? I ask because, you know, just to kind of like lay my cards on the table, I always wanted to get married. I knew when I was, you know, younger that like that was something I wanted. I wanted to have my person. I wanted to find my person. And I got married when I was 26. And so, you know, it's been a pretty long time. And it's interesting to me. And I was saying like that I compare my life to all of these friends. I have so many who are living amazing lives, but who didn't partner up. And I sometimes wonder, you know, is that because they didn't feel the desire for a partner the way that I did, or was it like bad luck, or a combination of both?
I think for me, it always has been about immigration. Like I knew when I was in London for 7 years, and I knew a few years in that I was going to leave, but I kind of couldn't. I for a variety of different reasons, I kind of got stuck there. And so I had like affairs, but I didn't really, like I was really worried of being dragged into something there or too attached and being stuck there because of a relationship. I really wanted to get out. And then when I moved I was in Brussels during the pandemic because I have just some of my closest friends are there, and I wanted to just be in a safe place while I started building my company. And actually, Belgium was a really good place to be under lockdown in, because the country's national motto is "We don't give a fuck," and really chill. The only thing they looted in the supermarket was the cheese section, but they still were having. So in my supermarket next to me, next to my building, every day, weekdays, wine tasting during the day in the wine section, so that they would just like pull down their mask, have a little wine. Like they were like completely chilled out. It was great. Um, but then during my time in Brussels, I started developing relationships with guys who were not there, but we knew each other. And then it ended up being a very interesting international experience after the vaccines came for me. And I've just arrived here. So I think it always has been, I've had a lot of long distance relationships. And funnily, it has always been the man who came, which was very interesting to me. And I'm hearing this from other places as well, that women are kind of okay with saying, okay, for like 3 months, we will not be in the same city, but then yes. And men find it hard. And interestingly, the guys who, both in my experience or in my life and from my female friends, they don't end up with somebody after. So it's not like, let's break this off because I want a girl who is already established in the city or whatever and lives on my street. They just don't want a relationship, but not even like flings. Like I think one of my surprises are millennials, especially men, is that, I was socialized amongst these like boomers in Eastern European show business where a man's main job is to fuck around. It's like, it's non-taxable, it's great. It's a great way of spending your life. A very kundera lifestyle. And then I thought that our guys would be like this, but they are not. And I'm like, what? Are you guys asleep? Like, do something. And they're just at home. I don't know, watching porn. I don't know what they are doing. So I'm like, okay, if you're not married, aren't you going to like, I don't know, paint the town? Like, why are you in New York? Why are you in?
I don't know. They're getting older. They're tired. They want to go to bed.
But this has been, but this has been so 10 years ago, even. I don't know. And this is pre-Me Too. So I think Me Too is more like it could happen because these processes had already started. Kind of big conscious decoupling of society. It's really interesting to me. And I'm actually curious whether, because I think a lot of this, is kind of taboos. Is that a cat?
Yeah.
Oh my God, hi. We get a lot of cats at Internet Taxons as well. Like, do you think that some of this can only be written about in fiction? Is there a liberating space there? Or do you have to actually be more literal and more archetypal and more identifiable there?
I mean, I think that fiction is wonderful because it creates a safe space, so to speak, to ask questions and to explore possibilities without having to draw any actual human beings into the mire with you. And but that it exists in conversation with journalism and with nonfiction. I think that we need to have both. There is the quest to, I think, in both cases, the idea is to say something true, to get to the truth of what is happening, to understand what it is that you're seeing, and to try to connect it to broader, I don't know, like kind of ancient questions, to history. And so I would never say that it's, that one is better than the other or one is like more necessary than the other. But I am thinking about how it seems as though this is a moment that it is hard to make good art about. And I'm sort of intrigued by the writers that I know who are doing a good job of it, or the artists I know who are doing a good job of it, who have found something to kind of look at and to reproduce in fiction or in art.
But why
that
is it
feels meaningful?
What makes it so hard? Is it the general confusion? Is it social media, the mediatized environment? Or the moral chaos, the feminine chaos? So what makes it difficult?
Okay, I think, and it's very distracting trying to think while this cat is licking my hands.
For those of you who are listening to us, there's a giant cat crawling across cats. I have 2 cats in this call.
I think it's a few different things. We live in maybe a pretty morally prescriptive time when asking provocative questions is frowned upon. But I think even more than that, I think there is increasingly less mystery in the world, and we are increasingly bad at tolerating mystery. This is my theory.
So, do you agree with Carton's hater about cheating? I mean, you recently wrote about that. Is that related to this? I mean, so much of infidelity, even just infidelity at the level of glances, or going too deep into somebody's Instagram, wherever somebody draws the line. I often find that polyamory kind of takes away the mystique of just good old sleeping around or promiscuity, and it turns it into an Excel sheet.
Exactly.
It's related somehow. And also these poor folks, they tried to cheat and they ended up on video on a giant stage in front of 50,000 people. We just kind of proved that point, right?
It's funny. I've been thinking a lot about that moment. I have a friend who was at that concert, who saw what happened, and he said that it was not fun. It was not fun, and it was not funny to witness that people were kind of confused and uncomfortable, which is interesting because, the cancellation of this couple was like a party. But they were the last people to appear on screen, which means that they were standing there embracing, looking up at a jumbotron that was roaming over the crowd that they were in for, minutes at a time, showcasing other couples. And they still did not step apart from each other. And I cannot stop thinking about what that means. Is that a rare moment in which they were so in love or in lust or whatever it was, but so present and so embodied with each other that they actually forgot what kind of world they live in? Was that a brief moment of transcendence?
That's so interesting, but also the kind of animal level of statistical understanding in humans, that if you're standing in such a huge crowd, you don't think that, they probably showed 10 couples, that you one of the 10 couples, right?
Mm-hmm. Maybe.
Older people, I don't know. I've never been in this situation, but
never got caught on a jumbotron?
Never, but it's on my bucket list. Please invite me. It's very interesting. There are theories that the overuse of AI will actually raise the value or increase the value of secrets, right? That we live in a kind of secretless society where, any text message can be screenshotted and shared. And I don't know, Elon Musk's dick shows up in two girlfriends texting about him 5 minutes later. There's no... It's a TMI culture. And this also means that few people will, rendezvous with somebody or job interview somebody that they know really nothing about. Mm-hmm. We don't really give people a chance to explain themselves.
Right.
There's something, I'm a second language English speaker, so I feel like everything I think is a secret because very few people that I encounter speak Hungarian, so they have no idea what I'm thinking and why I'm thinking that. And it's like speaking an alien language. But there has to be something for local culture, right? Where you can hide yourself and have the power to decide when you want to.
Mm-hmm. Well, we live in a moment where there is, at this point, we know what people are thinking all the time because they're posting it. And I think, it's obviously there's instant gratification to posting and to getting engagement back. And then sometimes somebody wants to fight with you and that raises your blood pressure and that gives you sort of a different kind of frisson. But the upshot of this is we increasingly we know what people are thinking all the time. We know where everybody is all the time. You know, privacy is increasingly a thing of the past. It's very difficult to disappear. It's difficult to disappear in a crowd. It's difficult to disappear in, you know, into a place where you can't be tracked by the phone in your pocket or by the ubiquitous cameras that are all around you. And it's increasingly difficult to disappear even into the solitude of your own head because our attention spans have all been completely shot to shit by digital media. So I think that when I say that there's less mystery in the world, I'm talking about all of that and then some.
I keep trying to remember there is a famous quote about the disappearance of magic. Maybe I'm just like paraphrasing Nietzsche in my head as a good Central European here, but there is definitely a kind of demythologization of the world that to me always feels so false, because it doesn't mean that the magic is gone. It just means that we become unable to see it. And the very strange kind of lunar love goods of the world who see the little flying twinkles that other people miss have such an enormous power, right? I mean, when we talk about somebody being good with people or charismatic or talented, you know, we're talking about the kiss of the muses. Alice Rubin is writing a book about muses, and she was on this podcast a couple of weeks ago, and that's her entire arena of inquiry. You know, like what is happening in this field of play that some people get kissed by the muse and they will tell you, like, I don't know how I wrote this book. I don't know how I created this painting. I have no idea why I can count so fast or have a perfect pitch. It has been handed to me. And maybe there is something about geniuses that when they are not crazy narcissists, it might actually come with some humility, because you do have something that you don't know the source of. But it also, you know, endows the artist with some responsibility, because say, you know, you write characters in your novels, like, do you base them on real people? And when you do you worry about their secrets or where they would draw the line? Do you actually call people like, hey, I want to base my villain on you? What do you think about this? Do you have an NDA?
You know, it's funny. I've never actually like one-to-one based a character on someone. I did for an upcoming book. I have an online friend who had at one point tweeted something. It had been years since I saw it, but it really stuck in my head. I was like, God, that was so smart. But I wanted to take it and I wanted to turn it into like the kind of life philosophy and some dialogue for a truly deranged person in my book.
What was the line? Can I ask what the line was?
No, you gotta wait.
Okay.
But I DM'd him and I was like, look, this is a really weird request, but can I take your tweets? Can I use some of your language? Like, I just am like, I'm fascinated by this. Can I paraphrase it or whatever? And he said, oh, you can have it. Like, it's my gift to you. You can reproduce it verbatim. And so he's thanked in the acknowledgements. And yeah, it's, but that's the most direct. And even then, of course, you know, these are his words, but they've been filtered through the lens of the story and of my imagination and what, you know, the kind of more perverse ideas or iteration of them that I was able to come up with, you know, where he initially said something kind of wholesome. And I was like, okay, but what if the person saying this wasn't wholesome? What if they were a crazy person? And it kind of goes to like character and to intent. And so and I'm just thinking about it because, of course,
it's an ethical way of going about it. Prospective novelists or existing novelists listening to this, watching this, do as Kat did.
Yes. I mean, if you're going to steal somebody's written words, it's a good idea. On the other hand, are there people, you know, are there characters who are partially based on this or that person, or they're like a mishmash of a few different people? Absolutely. And I would never ever like even hint at the identities of these people, because A, I don't want them to recognize themselves. And B, if they do recognize themselves, I want plausible deniability. Oh, no, that's not you. I had no idea you even
And they
existed.
say that any likeness is a matter of coincidence. It was an accident.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it is a hazard of, being close to novelists. And obviously some of my good friends are novelists. And I was reading the upcoming, I was reading an upcoming book.
In each other's books, right?
Yeah. I mean, I'm in a writing group with the novelist and satirist Lee Stein, who is just wonderful, so gifted. And she had a character in her book. It is an older lady, but who's very, very vain. And it was like, when she had disposable income, she would go and like get a laser facial or something. And I remember reading this and I was so entertained because I was like, that's me. And I left this note. I was like, is this me? And she said, no. But I was like, I think it's me.
Coincidence.
That's fine.
I recognize myself, but she was gracious. I love that. This is so interesting. I mean, a lot of people, in my case, have been encouraging me to write memoirs. And I'm like, I don't know if I can. Like there are so many people who would not consent to that. And I understand that in some cases, a memoir is a sort of revenge, but I don't like vindictive memoirs. I don't like memoirs when I know that, oh my God, that must be horrible for this person to read this. Their daughter or ex-husband or whatever are writing these things about them. Maybe like after everybody's dead, that's a different thing. But even after that, I remember reading Katharine Graham's Personal History, that is really an indictment of her mother who is dead. And, it's so interesting that there's one of the most celebrated memoirs in American life today. And I think Agnes would fucking hate this book and would have a lot of things to say about it, but she can't. So.
Yeah. Well, this kind of brings us full circle, actually, to where we started. So, I think this would be my final thought, which is the thing about a memoir is it is your story, but other people are in it. And in a world where we are all trying to self-narrativize and self-mythologize, it doesn't even matter if it's unflattering. It's you're not in control if you're in somebody else's life story. And I think that in and of itself can be kind of terrifying.
Kat Rosenfield, thank you so much for joining the Hope Axis and giving us so much hope about private life, millennial women, aging graciously, and not stealing people's lives and turning them against their wishes. If they consent, sure. Thank you so much for joining us. This was a delight.
Thanks for having me.